Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special episode of The Framing Effect. Today, we are joined by Mr. Jim Rogers, an avid adventurer and investment biker, and the co-founder of one of the most successful hedge funds in the history of investing, the Quantum Fund, which has averaged a return of over 4,200%. Now, Mr. Rogers, how are you doing today? How's the weather over in Singapore?
I'm fine. Well, Singapore's on the equator, so it's always hot and raining. Today it's hot and cloudy.
Yeah.
When it rains, it doesn't rain long.
Yeah. Southeast Asia always has that humid weather.
Well, I like it here. It's great.
Yeah, that's good. Now, just for a little bit about your background, could you tell us a little bit about how you came to be? Because I know your adventures have taken you far and wide, and you've been very successful.
Well, I grew up in a small town in the backwoods of Alabama. My phone number was 5. In fact, it was that small and that isolated. So I wanted to see the world. People who grow up in places like that often want to see the world. I was one of them. One of my long ambitions and early goals was to make enough money to retire soon so I could see the world. Especially I wanted to go around the world on a motorcycle because that's a very good way to see the world. So I did it. I retired when I was 37. I made a little bit of money and set off to see the world. In those days, it wasn't easy. There was still the Soviet Union and Red China and things like that. But I kept trying and finally got permission and did it a couple of times, once on a motorcycle, once in a car.
Yeah. Right. So as you mentioned, you retired at the incredible age of 37. But what is like a big difference that you would notice between when you were on Wall Street and what Wall Street is like now? Because I'm sure it changed a lot.
Well, sure, technology changes everything. The way we travel has changed a whole lot in the last 100, 200 years. There were no railroads 200 years ago, no airplanes, no nothing. No, Wall Street's the same way. Everything was on paper. Trading was done by pieces of paper that was sent around Wall Street every morning. Now everything's on the computer, etc. The New York Stock Exchange is basically all stock exchanges around the world have disappeared because everything is by computer now. But the basics are still the same. You have people's emotions getting involved. You have some people doing a lot of research and making successful investments, and a lot of people being lazy and sloppy and making bad investments. None of that has changed. You can go back 200 years ago in the city of London or Amsterdam or other places, you will see the same things. Human beings have always been the same, for better or for worse.
Yeah. So, like you said, with technology being a big part of the change in the past couple of decades, but now we have artificial intelligence and, it's getting so advanced with ChatGPT being able to make calculated decisions and, act like a human. How do you see that impacting the future of the market?
Well, I don't know if these machines will have no emotions at all. I'll be very surprised because the input comes from human beings. Yeah. And all of our input is based on what we know, and we all are subject to, whether we know it or not, emotions and miscalculations and lack of judgment, lack of doing research. So I'm sure we'll make things faster, just as trading is now. I mean, you and I are sitting in 2 different continents. That could not have happened 100 years ago. Likewise, you and I could be trading stocks anywhere in the world, even though we never leave our home. That is a major, major change. In my day, everybody had to go to Wall Street or the city of London in order to trade and to work and to be in the investment business. That is no longer the case. We could be anywhere. We don't have to go to Wall Street or the city of London or anywhere. We can do this in Iowa if we want to. We can do this in Guatemala. And there are people doing it now. That's a major change. But still, the basics are the same. Supply and demand, greed, laziness, all of those things still exist.
Yeah, indeed. Now, getting into a bit more of the financial side of what I want to ask with you today. Recently, the market has seen some turmoil. Like Gautam Adani's various firms have dropped in about 45 billion in value just in a couple of days after the Hindenburg report came out with a extensive document detailing the different levels of, I guess, fraud that the Adani Group has committed. And the Adani Group has partnered with various banks, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, and Barclays. And as we've seen in the past couple of weeks, those major banks have also taken huge like pay cuts to their major officials. How do you see the situation playing out forward, and what do you think caused all of this?
Well, I have not read the report. I do not know the companies at all, other than the fact that they're huge and have been successful. All I know about the report is that it alleges X, Y, and Z. So I have absolutely no basis to say yes or no. I do know that in my experience, short sellers are usually more accurate and successful than the targets because they have to do a lot of research, a lot of homework, and not many people sell short. So the few who do have been historically unique and usually successful. But other than that, I have absolutely no clue. I see that in this morning's newspaper that both are saying this, that, and the other. I don't know the facts. If you know the facts, if you can read it and figure it all out, you will make a lot of money, because if it's wrong, you can buy the shares. If it's right, you can add to the shorts, because if the shorts are right, the company's in serious trouble. If the company's right, they're going to make a fortune.
Yeah.
I mean, the company's going to make a fortune.
Mhm. Now, let's move into your experiences in investment biker. So, what was like your most exciting or memorable moment you've had on your journeys?
Well, I
I
don't
know
think
there's a lot.
I don't think there's an answer to that question, because the whole thing was very, very exciting. You know, every day if I wake up New York, anywhere, and I go to the left or the right, I more or less know what's going to happen. But every day when I woke up on that trip, I had absolutely no clue what would be happening 5 minutes from now. And that's one of the reasons I did it. I wanted the adventure, I wanted the excitement, etc. Everything. I mean, I guess one of the things that pops to mind is we were held hostage in the Congo for 8 or 9 days at one time. That was, looking back on it, exciting. I'm not sure exciting is the right word, right adjective at the time. But we had lots of experiences. That's one reason I did it. I wanted the adventure. I wanted the excitement. I wanted the challenges. I wanted the discoveries. And that's why I did it a second time. Our first trip was 2 years around the world, but it wasn't enough. So I went again for 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you made it out safely out the Congo. And
Uh,
just a
I
little bit
hope
off.
everybody will see the world. It'll be good for the world. It'll be good for them.
Yeah. Um, just like a little off the side question. In the second time you did the trip, you went in a modified Mercedes truck. Yeah, that's a pretty
Yes, yes,
interesting
yes.
car.
I had done it on a motorcycle the first time, so I wanted a different experience. I wanted a convertible. I didn't want to just go in a car or a truck or something. So Mercedes and I made a special. It was an SLK body, which is a sports car body, and a G-Wagon chassis. That's the high end four-wheel drive diesel truck SUV they make. So it was, in the end, a good combination.
Hmm. Now, recently you've talked about your investments in Uzbekistan, and I'm sure, with going around 116 countries, 100,000 kilometers, you visited so many developing countries. So what made you invest in Uzbekistan?
Well, I have been to Uzbekistan 2 or 3 times. It's a very interesting place historically, and as far as tourist sites are concerned. But under the Soviets, it was a disaster. Everything under the Soviets was a disaster. It was one of the Soviet republics. But in the last few years, a new group has come to power in Uzbekistan, and they say they're running the country the way you and I, or at least I would run the country. They're opening the markets, etc. If it's accurate, Uzbekistan is going to be a very exciting place. They have vast natural resources, great location for trade and commerce and tourism. It's an astonishing tourism country. So if I'm right, and if they're doing what they say they're doing, it's probably going and it's undiscovered. Not many people can even find Uzbekistan on a map, much less invest there. It's going to be a very good opportunity.
Mm. What do you think about the other parts of Central Asia and maybe the Indian subcontinent? Do you see a rise in their development as well?
Well, Kazakhstan has huge natural resources, and they periodically do the right thing. So it may be, I do not have investments in Kazakhstan at the moment. So it could be an interesting place, but most of them could be. Most of them have lots of natural resources. They are somewhat isolated, but that's historic rather than geographic. They could be very open to the outside world. So there are probably going to be great opportunities in everywhere in that part of the world, but especially at the moment, Uzbekistan, from what I know.
Mm-hmm. Now, during your initial motorcycle trip, I think you visited Qingdao, China, a couple of times, and I was born there, so I'm very curious about what you thought about Qingdao and your experience in China.
Well, I'm very optimistic about China. I first went to China in 1984. I was terrified because American propaganda all my life had said that the Chinese are evil, vicious, bloodthirsty, dangerous people. So I figured I'd get shot when I got off the plane. Didn't take me long traveling around China to realize, wait a minute, these are hardworking, educated, smart people, innovative. And I realized that China was on the rise again. China is the only country in world history that's been great 3 or 4 times. I mean, Rome was great once, Egypt was great once, Great Britain was great once, but China's been great 3 or 4 times. China's also collapsed and been a catastrophe 3 or 4 times. But every time they have, after a few decades or centuries, they've turned around and risen to the top again. I could see that was happening despite the propaganda. I mean, since then, of course, everybody can see, wait a minute, China's pretty successful. So we all know that now. Qingdao was a wonderful place. It's right there on the sea. Great beer. I mean, I, anyway, heard of Qingdao because of the beer. Yeah. The Germans went there 100-odd years ago and started making beer, and it was good beer, still is good beer. And Qingdao became famous in many parts of the world for its beer. But there's a lot more there, as you know, as I presume you know. It's a very interesting and dramatic city.
Yeah. The Germans take it over and, they made beer and made the infrastructure pretty good. So, I don't know.
So the architecture, too. I mean, it's amazing that, colonialists, whichever nationality they were, often left some good things. And in Qingdao, they left the beer.
Yeah.
Which is still good beer.
Yeah. I've never had it, but maybe someday.
When you get older or when you travel more, have some Qingdao beer.
Yeah, when I go back. Now, I also saw you guys have a Bilibili page. And for the listeners that might not know, Bilibili is like the YouTube of China, I guess. And I saw your daughters were speaking like perfect Mandarin, which is very impressive. But so I see that you must hold like a little bit of importance to learning the language. So I was wondering how you would compare like the ceilings of the development of the West versus the East.
Well, once I realized that China was on the rise, in the 80s and 90s, I would often be in the US and I would say on TV and places, everybody should teach their children and grandchildren Mandarin because it will be extremely important in the 21st century. In those days, of course, everybody said, no, Japanese. And I kept saying, no, Chinese. Anyway, then I had children. I said, oh, gosh, what do I do now? I've been saying this for many years. So I got a Chinese governess to live with us. And I told her to never speak English, only speak Mandarin with this little girl. And so the little girl grew up thinking, well, some people speak like this and some people speak like, she thought everybody was that way. I mean, she now knows, of course, but they grew up with two native languages, Mandarin and English. And for whatever reason, their Mandarin has become perfect. The CCTV, the Chinese TV people have taken them to Beijing 3 or 4 times and had special shows about them. And I asked why, and they said, well, they speak better Mandarin than we do. And then we find it amazing that two kids with blue eyes speak better Mandarin than the TV people in China.
Yeah.
So for some reason, it has worked. It doesn't mean they're going to be successful. It doesn't mean anything. You can ask them in 25 years. But at the moment, they both speak perfect Mandarin.
I'm sure they'll be fine. But just recently, I guess a couple of weeks ago, the Chinese population shrunk for the first time in several decades. And that's been an increasing fear with I guess the population demographics are getting more old, which is happening in a lot of Asian countries. How do you see that, how do you think that will impact the economic side of the country?
Well, that's a very good question. Japan's population has been declining since 2010, so we have an example that we can watch, get some idea of what's going to happen. But China still has 1,400,000,000 people. There's still a few Chinese around. The chopsticks market is not going to disappear anytime soon. Many Asian countries are having this experience. Korea is a disaster, as you probably know, demographically anyway. We will see how it's all going to work out. China is somewhat artificial because they started with a one-child policy, which they have changed, but it's expensive to have children, as more and more people know, and more of us are getting selfish and don't want to have to spend the money and the time on children. But I would suspect that this will be looking back in 200 or 300 years, this will be a period in demographics where population did decline for a while, but then something will happen, prosperity or something, and people will start having babies again.
Mm-hmm. I guess it does go in cycles where it dips and then goes up again. So, yeah.
Well, we will see. I don't know. But I do know that historically, people do like to have children. Now, part of that was because they needed labor. They needed somebody to take care of them. We still need somebody to take care of us, but not quite the same way as we did before.
Yeah. And I'm seeing that you've written a couple of books about the Japanese economy in the past couple of years.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've, like how the current Japanese economy is losing trust. And the Japanese currency, the yen, is currently 130 to the dollar, which has basically declined in value by a lot. So how do you see the future of the Japanese economy?
Well, as I said before, Japan's population has been declining since 2010. That's a long time now, and it doesn't seem it's going to get better, going to change, going to get improved, because the Japanese don't particularly like foreigners, and they've started letting in a few immigrants, but not many, so far not enough anyway. I mean, Japan is a wonderful, wonderful country. I love the country, but population is declining and debt is going through the roof. It's a high-cost place to do business, and so I don't see much hope for the Japanese as circumstances stand today. But if they change, if they start having babies, if they let in immigrants, if they stop spending so much money, things could get better. But in the meantime, on present trajectories, Japan is a serious, serious problem. If you're 10 years old in Japan, you should leave. Or you better learn martial arts, because in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, things are going to be really bad. In countries that usually have bad economic problems, have bad social problems.
Mm-hmm. No,
It's a very exciting country, though. I love Japan very much. I hate to see
yeah,
it happening.
it's a lot of culture there, and certainly is a great country to visit. I
There's
was
a lot of
wondering,
good things.
yeah, I was wondering why you chose to live in Singapore. Is it because of the finance or other aspects?
No, we tried China, but China is extremely polluted, was then anyway, less polluted now. So Singapore is not polluted, and in Singapore they speak English and they speak Mandarin. I don't speak English. I mean, I don't speak Mandarin, so it seemed to be a good choice. So far, it's been very good for us.
That's good. And that's all the questions that I have prepared today. Oh, except actually, for all the young people like myself who are interested in maybe pursuing economics or business or finance, what advice could you give to the youth today?
Well, the first thing I would strongly suggest is be sure you learn a second language because in your lifetime it's going to be more and more important. I obviously suggest Mandarin, but I mean, there are other languages besides. I mean, Spanish, for instance, is a widely spoken language and it's a Romance language. It will give you a basis in other languages like French or Italian or something. My main thing is learn another language, but also, I guess, second is to figure out what you love the most. Don't do what other people tell you. At one point I thought I was going to be a doctor because that's what people told me to do. Thank goodness I didn't. At some one point I came to my senses. I discovered Wall Street and fell in love, and so I went to Wall Street, fortunately. But the main advice, my experience is figure out what you love. Do not do what your teachers or friends or parents tell you. Figure out what you love. And if people laugh at you, you're probably right. That's probably the very right place to be. So figure out what you love and then pursue it. And don't listen to the other people.
Hmm. Well, that's great advice. And that's all the questions I have today. So thank you so much for taking your time and sitting down for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Maybe I'll see you in Qingdao someday and we can drink a Qingdao beer or two.
Yes, no.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.